right. Hi, everyone. Good morning for everyone that tuned in. At this point, I see a lot of familiar names. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Joe, Jonah, and Bo, and everyone that's the usual Mr. Java and as well. Okay. So there's I already see some good comments here in terms of effect. Well, things about immune imprinting, T cell exhaustions, IgG forecast switching. Well, I'm going to touch upon one topic actually here that is mentioned with the cloud shot did it comment. Okay, so uh, thank you for coming. So this is the third week in a row in that I talk about COVID. I know it's a little bit excessive, but it's mostly because the US is anticipating a new XBB booster in the next 1 or 2 weeks. And but for some reason, the official has not been communicating a lot lately. So here I am to share a study, shed some light on what happens to immune response, particularly cellular response, after repeating booster after booster of mRNA vaccine. So here we this study is really just focusing on mRNA vaccine, but I do want to talk about some implications afterward. So let me bring up the study here. All right. So here we are. So this study is published by a Japanese research team looking at both the long-term antibody and cellular response in patients undergoing hemodialysis and after receiving 5 doses of the mRNA vaccine, including the last September's bivalent vaccine. Now, Japan, they have the same bivalent vaccine as the US, which is the BA.4/5. Unlike Europe, they have the BA.1, 2, so slightly different versions, but the same technology. So let's look at some of the key findings of this article first, and then we will discuss some implications together. So this research team, they started to prospectively, actively looking at both the humoral or the antibody and cellular immunity in more than 2,500 residents and healthcare workers in the Fukushima prefecture in Japan since September 2021. Now, unlike when I see this, I just immediately, give me a thought that unlike the pharmaceutical industry and the FDA that kept withholding cellular immunity, saying like it was too difficult to measure, this Japanese research team said that they used multiple methodologies, okay, to evaluate T cell immune memory specific to this SARS-CoV-2 virus. So apparently, it's a lot easier to measure cellular immunity in Japan than in the US. I wonder why. Well, anyhow, so some study participants received all 5 of the mRNA vaccine from Pfizer. Now, some of them did receive a 1 dose of Moderna as their third dose, according to their record. So there are some mix and match, but nevertheless, or mRNA vaccine. So here is the timeline of these dialysis patients. They had their first dose, second dose when it first came out. The first year they came out in the middle of 2021, and then they had their third dose. And then the booster, a fourth booster, which is still the original vaccine in early, somewhat in the summer of 2022, and then in the fall of 2022, November, they had their bivalent booster. So that's their regimens that they received. Now, so even though that they monitored 25,000 people, including some healthy, some undergo hemodialysis, this paper is really just focused on 61 individuals, okay, that are on hemodialysis. So the result is from 61 individuals. The average age was 70 years old. 90% of them had high blood pressure. Half had type 2 diabetes. About 1 in 10 had high cholesterol. And about a quarter of them, okay, had a mix and match. A quarter of the 61 individuals. So this population, it's more fragile. Okay, not only just they're older, but also they have multiple these common chronic illnesses. So it is considered the so-called high risk populations in general. So, just to bring everybody on the same page, so with the current spike protein based mRNA vaccine, the biggest official selling point is to prevent severe illnesses, particularly in high risk populations, like in this study. And in terms of the immunity, T cells or cellular immunity is responsible for preventing severe illness, namely hospitalizations and death from COVID. And on the other hand, antibody-based or humoral immunity from mRNA vaccine, we have seen that it consistently wanes over time, and that's why they are pretty much less than 50% effective in preventing infections after about 2 months or so. Like a couple of weeks after, it's great, but it drops, throughout all the countries and throughout all different studies. So that is a given fact there. Now, this study, they've gave us some very important findings in terms of the cellular side of the story, so which is a little bit newer compared to the rest of that. All right, let me see. Oh, this way you can look at more, maybe. Okay. Now, so here, so even though almost, let's look at the finding. Let's scroll down a little bit very quick. Now, so there's a lot of data there. I'm not going to go through every single graph, but basically the discussions very much supported the data, the reported finding. So even although almost everybody had antibody responses or immunity, only about half of them, okay, kept their cellular immunity 3 months after the fifth dose. So it's not looking very great. Now, the team also referenced some older studies and point out that even in healthy populations, only about 64% of the individual acquired cellular immunity after a third dose. Now, this, okay, might be due to a phenomenon called T cell exhaustion, which was seen and confirmed in animal models. And now that has not exactly confirmed in human. Okay, there's always this mojo of difficult to measure T cells activities in humans. So this has not been officially confirmed, but does make the pattern. Now, in terms of what this T cell exhaustion is that, without going into too much detail, in brief, is a state where the T cells are chronically stimulated by a given antigen. So, namely, for example, chronic infections, or keep repeating, for example, giving the same antigens over and over from maybe vaccines or other means. Now, and then the T cell will start producing a much lower amount of immune response. So that's why they're exhausted and become less able to kill virus infected cells. I think these observations, okay, without going into too much of the even the science explanation, is that it's quite alarming in my opinion, because we are not assessing T cell immunity from vaccine in the vast majority of the people who received the vaccines. I don't know my T cell status, okay, and I doubt a lot of any of you know if you had any vaccines or infections, and regardless of the case. So the official recommendations, it's expected that certainly, booster after booster, the reason is that, well, its effectiveness to prevent, okay, severe disease in high-risk populations. Now, but according to this statistical finding, or the finding from this paper, that might not be true for almost as many as half of the people who received a booster after booster. Now, could that be part of the reason why we continue to see like more hospitalizations and deaths due to COVID-19 than what we would like to see, right? Now, so I've watched a lot of the, almost all of the live FDA and industry presentation discussions about their COVID vaccine throughout the past couple of years. I didn't do it in this June, which I was out of the country. But every time, when the advisory committee, the FDA advisory committee, asked for the cellular immunity, cellular data, and the FDA and the industry kept pushing back and claiming it was too difficult to measure. So if you look at my older videos from last year, I have consistently pointed out these, things that is very concerning. Now, but with this new study, now I wonder, just from a scientist perspective, like if the data was too difficult to obtain or too bad to show people. Now, I don't want to speculate too much here, but from my standpoint, if I had a good data, I would show it, right? Like there's no reason to not show it. So Hmm. Okay. Well, anyhow, so that's a little bit strange throughout the time. But coming back to the study, the bigger question is that with these people, they could be getting the booster, and doesn't matter how much they get. After the third dose, basically, they would just stop producing these cellular immunity. Doesn't matter if it is the fourth dose or the fifth dose. So, yeah, that's the problem here. And well, the bigger question is what could be done to protect these high risk patients if uh, they just won't acquire immunity. Now, a little bit interesting fact here is that they see about among the 14 individuals who received so-called hetero genius vaccine, that means mix and match. They mixed in one dose of the Moderna, or actually set 13% successfully acquire cellular immunity. So it's a much higher ratio, compared to those that all received Pfizer. So now, I did mention last week in my last week's video that we do have more options this year in the US, including protein-based Novavax. Now, I'm not selling it, okay? But this finding, does support some, mix and match vaccine, regimens. And so, if I were to hypothesize something, that I would think, mixing in protein-based vaccine this year may not give you as high of a antibody response immediately, but may stimulate more on the cellular side. Now, it is not so hard to imagine, because you are essentially giving a much different orientations or arrangements of the same antigen, even if it's the same, but it's different, arranged differently. So that creates some different recognition patterns for the immune system to recognize. So it could be expected for that to happen. Now I do want to point out studies like this one. Okay, even though it is a prospective monitoring, it is still observational. Okay, now it doesn't have like a control group. Okay, and also it is very limited to a localized homogeneous populations and many more. So that's some of these limitations here. But from of course, from a official standpoint, I do see some of the reasons, that officials making recommendations, blanket statements, say, hey, just recommend a booster for all high risk patients. But I mean, that makes sense in a way of speaking, is that, well, logistically, financially, it is almost impossible to measure everyone's T cell activities, right? But at the same time, yes, we cannot always do these measurements, but I think communications is very important. I think it should be the responsibility to communicate important findings like this one, that challenge some of these existing recommendations. Like, well, is it more the better? Sometimes that might be having some individual variability, and we're talking about high risk patients and high risk population. That is the population that we need to protect the most, right? Now, so that, unfortunately, that part of the communications is continue not happening very well. And so here we are, channels like mine do want to report some of these findings, not to discourage everyone from getting vaccine, but on the other hand, it is to give enough information for you to make decisions. But with a study like this, I'm more disappointed between the FDA and the industry, is that even the advisory committee asked for these cellular immunity data. They've never seen it from from the industry side. Like, I'm sure they said, they claim that they've done it, they've measured it. Why not show it, right? So and it is consistent throughout 2 years. Don't tell me you don't have data in 2 years, right? So why does that? That's beyond me. Okay. Before I wrap up here, I do want to repeat this. Well, I personally support rational vaccine decision. I'm not here to say you go get it, not to get it. I'm here to give you enough information. Now, I personally, I'm very honest. I received three doses of mRNA vaccine from Moderna based on my assessments of the current that time situations and also some of the job requirements. So, but science in this field is very dynamic and changing. And like some of you point out that there is always new findings, T cell exhaustions, namely one, immune imprinting. Actually, there's another two more recent study that's in that area, and I do want to share in the next couple of weeks or so, or next 1 or 2 weeks, when if I can fit into the schedule, looking at a lot of us that even have vaccine also had infections. Okay, well, that should boost immunity, right? So what's next, right? What's next? I think that's some of the questions that we have, and unfortunately, we don't get a lot of those from maybe news media. But so then COVID, is also changing. Okay, so I think that is something to keep in mind. So I'm here to give you hopefully unbiased, okay, information so that you can make decisions. So and it is your choice to choose how to stay healthy, right? So that is all the content for this week. And that's very thank you very much for all of you that tune in so early, and I see a lot of comments. I'll point out a few and discuss a few that and we'll wrap up for this week. I know East Coast people, it's okay 9, and then for West Coast, you may have to come back a little for replay. Let's see. Yeah, and that's yes, it's not protective. Sometimes when you just to get it, you don't expect the vaccine to offer complete protections. That's very well true. So both of my parents, they are older. Okay, they're 60s, 70s, and they're relatively healthy. They have some chronic conditions. They're on some meds, lipid drugs, blood pressure drugs, just like everybody in the 60s and 70s. They had their vaccine, and they had their COVID too last December. Yeah, so it is something happening to a lot of people. But fortunately, they turn out okay. um they ramp up the fear. Yeah, there seems to have a lot of discussions about maybe even return of masking. I don't think it's rational to live like what we've lived in the last 2 years, and I don't think everybody is doing anything like that in that regard. Everybody's traveling, everybody's just living more to the normal before COVID. um okay. All right. I think, thank you for all of you that, so, do want to thank you, Amber. It's like you support getting rid of diabetes and heart diseases. Um, yes, that is something very important. Metabolic diseases does bring down your whole immunity overall, and without immunity, a good immunity, that's where infectious disease take over very easily. Okay. All right. No, I have not covered the Denmark study. I'll look into it in terms of how one batch may have caused more uh, side effects than others. So I'll mark this down. Thank you. Thank you. All right. All right. So that's pretty much for all the noteworthy discussions here. Um, Well, so that's all, and thank you, everyone. And so have a good Sunday. If you're in the U.S., if you're in other regions, have a good rest of the day, night. Anyhow, but well, let's tune back next week, and probably with a recorded with recorded sessions on something maybe we can switch a little bit next week, right? A little bit on a general health topic to help with the body. So, one last question. I do okay. One last questions about uh, J&J. Now J&J is no longer available. Okay, J&J, it was taken off the market in about May. In the US, it's about 16 million people had J&J. Uh, Not a whole lot compared to everybody else. So I don't think they're updating anymore. They're done. So there hasn't been any newer research in that regard. Honestly, the most thorough one on J&J was published last December, and you could expect in terms of the side effects, it's very similar to the AstraZeneca in terms of some of the serious one, especially because of the similar technological platform, the adenovirus based problem. Um, so that's the blood clots, namely, that's the one of the major one. So that's that. All right. All right. Thank you very much. And I'll see you again, hopefully, in next week. All right. Take good care. All right. Bye.